he's a decent man, but I think he's been weak. The political impartiality of the Speaker is a cornerstone of our political democracy. And I think it was apparent to everybody in the chamber that the Speaker's decision, although he couched it in the safety and security of members, was, whether fully intentionally or not, but it would appear that he'd been severely lobbied and bullied, I would say, by the Labour leadership to make life a lot easier for Labour by avoiding a vote of the SNP that many Labour politicians had said they were going to support.
Okay, Jo, that's a very clear and a very damning verdict. I mean, you say the impartiality of the Speaker is obviously paramount. Clearly that is. In saying that, you think he was quite simply biased towards his old party. He was doing Keir Starmer, consciously doing Keir Starmer a favour. That's what you believe?
Yes.
And what about the argument? And you've heard it from the Speaker a couple of times now in the House of Commons with some emotion. He was worried for the well-being, for the safety of MP. You say it was couched in the language of safety, Jo, which suggests you simply don't believe that.
Well, I don't believe that the timing of this, given that we have had threats against MPs for years, and certainly in recent months, they have been escalating. I think that, Kit Malthouse in his point of order made a very important point, which is if we are to kowtow to threats from extremists to change our political procedures in order to keep our politicians safe, and there is something fundamentally wrong with with our democracy. We need, if the decision was that the only way to keep politicians safe is to change the rules, that certainly should have been discussed with probably the Procedures Committee. And there are policies within or avenues within the House of Commons. But for the Speaker to make this decision at this moment in time, at a politically incredibly sensitive moment, does seem to me to be more than coincidental.
More than coincidental, by which you mean he was taking part in effectively a conspiracy to help his old party, the Labour Party, and disadvantage the others. That's pretty broadly what you're saying. You're painting a picture, Jo, and challenge me, contradict me if I'm wrong. You're painting a picture of the Speaker as a really quite basically dishonest occupant of the chair who must go because of that. That is at odds with some of your very senior colleagues, Jo, isn't it, who say that he's a decent man and not questioning his integrity.
Yes, no, I would hasten to add that I found Speaker Hoyle to be a decent man. I think that I am very sad that I have had to come to this conclusion, and I think that he's a decent man who has been lent on very heavily by the Labour Party.
But that's an indictment that's an indictment, Jo, of weakness, not dishonesty. You said
exactly.
You said that, but that's not what you said a moment ago. I just want to be clear on what you are saying. You said he was biased. That's not the same as being weak. You insist that he is biased and he was making excuses to cover that up?
No, I think we're dancing around the head of a pin here, John, because I think it's he will, in his own mind, I was in the chamber yesterday when he made that first apology. In his own mind, I think he wants to justify the decision that he made that he knows was wrong on the basis of that it was for the safety of and I think he absolutely does care for everybody's safety. But I think in his heart of hearts, he does know that in making that decision, he was making a political decision, which he now clearly regrets.
I'm listening to you carefully, and I'm trying to listen as carefully as I can. It does seem to me that parts of what you're saying are internally contradictory. You tell me his impartiality is not just in question. You don't accept it anymore. You say that he's been making excuses. You don't accept his argument that he was concerned for MP safety because you said that was just the language in which his excuses were couched. Now you tell me that he is a decent man. Do you want to finally, just on this before we move on, be clear? Do you think Speaker Hoyle is a man of integrity who deserves his place in the chair, at least on that head?
I think he's a decent man, but I think he's been weak on this particular issue. So, and I think also you need to reflect on what happened at the end of the evening with the vote, because if one believed that this was just about the safety of members in having in being allowed to speak,
Yes.
why were we now not allowed to vote at the end of the evening?
Yeah. But if your party had voted, isn't it correct, Jo? If your party had taken the opportunity to vote, then there would duly have been a vote on the SNP motion.
There should have been no. That's not true, and this is part of the complexity of the narrative that there may well have only been time for 2 votes, and because the Labour amendment was allowed, there may well have been 2 votes from Labour and the SNP that the government would have opposed, and then not time for the government amendment to be put, and therefore, it put the Conservative in a perilous position of being seen to have voted down twice the call for a ceasefire, and then not being able to put our reasoned position of calling for a humanitarian pause, which would have been appalling. So if we're talking about the safety of MPs being allowed to express their opinions and make their case, because let's face it, we all want a settled solution for Gaza, and we all need to be heard, and we all need to have the right. But this was an
Jo,
SNP
I hear your argument, and thank you for sharing. I do want to put to you just finally, very briefly, crude party political point scoring was also integral to what we saw, including on your side, the Conservative side. I suggest that is the case. Do you accept that?
I accept that opposition days are always about party political scoring.
On your side too. On your side too.
But in this case, this was about the procedures in the House of Commons and the integrity of Parliament as opposed to anything to do with party politics. And that's what shocked me the most.
All right. Jo Gideon, for your thoughts. Thank you for coming on the programme.